Come on in, you guys. We're about ready to start a brand new episode of Jimmy Rants. JimmyRants.com is the website. If you want to engage live in the content, you got to go follow me. I'm over on Instagram Live, so I'm at Livin' Low Carb Man, LIVINLOWCARBMAN. Once you are there, you can engage live, just like healing scenery and all the great people coming in right now to watch the show. If you missed the live, you can watch it on replay for up to 24 hours on Instagram, but it does disappear after 24 hours, so we throw all the past episodes up over at JimmyRants.com, so definitely go over there. You can also subscribe to the show and see all kind of fun stuff over at JimmyRants.com. We also put all the past episodes up over at YouTube, so type in the keyword Jimmy Rants, you will find the show, and that's how you find the show called Jimmy Rants. Okay, you guys, so lately I've been talking a lot about mindset regarding the COVID-19 outbreak. I've been doing a little bit of kind of keto stuff in there, the dietary guidelines here and there. Today I got one I want you to keep an open mind about. Because as much as we want to think that this COVID-19 just suddenly came on the scene, it's very interesting that this did not surprise some people in the world. And I want to read a scenario to you and then give some commentary about this when I'm done reading. So imagine this. Imagine an outbreak of a novel zoonotic coronavirus transmitted from bats to pigs to people that eventually becomes efficiently transmissible from person to person, leading to a severe pandemic. The pathogen and the disease it causes are modeled largely on SARS, but it is more transmissible in the community by people with mild symptoms. The disease starts off in pig farms in Brazil, quietly and slowly at first, but then it starts to spread more rapidly in healthcare settings. When it starts to spread efficiently from person to person in the low-income, densely packed neighborhoods of the megacities in South America, the epidemic starts to explode. It's first exported by air travel to Portugal, then the United States and China, and then to many other countries. Although at first some countries are able to control it, it just continues to spread and be reintroduced, and eventually no country can maintain control. There is no possibility for a vaccine being available in the first year. There is an antiviral drug that can help the sick, but not significantly limits the spread of the disease. Since the whole human population is now susceptible during the initial months of the pandemic, the cumulative number of cases increases exponentially, doubling every week. And as the cases and deaths accumulate, the economy and societal consequences become much more severe. The scenario will end at the 18-month point where 65 million people will have died. The pandemic is beginning to slow due to the decreasing number of susceptible people. The pandemic will continue at some rate until there is an effective vaccine or until 80 to 90% of the population around the world has been exposed. From that point on, it is likely to be an endemic childhood disease. Did that sound familiar? Now, obviously, some of the details in there may be a little off from what you're thinking about. But did that scenario sound familiar? Would it shock you to learn that that was written in October of 2019? It was. It was a part of this thing called Event 201. If you're not familiar with Event 201, definitely you can Google it. The information's out there for everybody to see, but Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security, they partnered up with the World Economic Forum along with Bill Gates and his Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. They hosted this event October the 18th, 2019, called Event 201. It's a high-level pandemic exercise happened in New York City. The exercise illustrated areas where public and private partnerships will be necessary during the response to a severe pandemic in order to diminish large-scale economic and societal consequences. In recent years, the world has seen a growing number of epidemic events, amounting to about 200 annually. These events are increasing and they are disruptive to health, economies, and society. Managing these events already strains global capacity even without a pandemic threat. Experts agree that it's only a matter of time before one of these epidemics will become global, a pandemic with potentially catastrophic consequences. A severe pandemic, which becomes Event 201, would require reliable cooperation among several industries, national governments, and key international institutions. Now let that sink in for a moment. We didn't hear about COVID-19 from China, is where it originated, until late December going into January. That was when we first started hearing about this. And then, of course, it came to America hot and heavy in March. October is when this symposium happened. Event 201, October. Now, I'm not a conspiracy theorist in general, but is that not strange? Like, stop and think about that a little bit. They simulated a worldwide pandemic of a coronavirus spreading around the world, killing a lot of people and straining economies and doing all this. Isn't that odd? Like, of all the scenarios in the world they could have possibly come up with, that one was the one? It's like it lines up like way too close to what actually has happened. Now, of course, people have found this Event 201. There's lots of videos on YouTube about it, by the way, if you want to go watch the simulation. It was about 5 or 6 hours. They went through this simulation of all these things. So you can go watch it on YouTube and see all about it and read about it online. But they had to release a statement. Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security had to release a statement because people were saying, oh my gosh, you predicted the COVID-19 coronavirus. Oh my gosh, 65 million people are going to die. And so they were having to respond to this. This was their statement. This was an event hosted by Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security with World Economic Forum and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Recently, the Health Security has received a lot of questions about whether the pandemic exercise that they conducted in October of 2019 was predicting the current coronavirus outbreak that started in China. To be clear, we did not make a prediction during our tabletop exercise. For this scenario, we had a fictional coronavirus pandemic, but we explicitly stated this was not a prediction of what would happen. Instead, it served to highlight how we need to be prepared to respond to the challenges that would arise in the case of a very severe pandemic. We are not now predicting COVID-19 will kill 65 million people, although our tabletop exercise included a mock coronavirus. The inputs we used for modeling its impact were only fictional and should not be compared to COVID-19. That's a little bit of CYA now, if you ask me. I mean, I get it. They're saying it was just totally fictional. We shouldn't read too much into it. But if you're going to put like the people that were in this meeting, which by the way, it was a closed meeting. Nobody was allowed into the meeting except these like highly influential members of society. They were the only ones at this exercise. And yet they now say, well, it wasn't predictive. It was just demonstrative of the severity of what could happen if we get into this. So, man, like when I read that, I went, like, of all the calamities they could have come up with as a scenario, a coronavirus turning global, that was shocking. I was like, whoa. And it's like literally 2.5 months before it hits us. Like, are you just hearing about this? Is this the first time you've heard about this? And you're kind of going, what? Like they kind of knew this maybe could happen? Did they know it was going to happen this quickly after their simulation? I don't know. Several of those websites that kind of look for, is this true or not? One of them is factcheck.org. And there's a conspiracy theory that this predicted the coronavirus outbreak that we're currently going through, and that they predicted 65 million people would die. So factcheck.org basically said, yeah, there's no evidence that this was a prediction of that happening. Yeah, so they kind of like dismissed that. I think Snopes did the same thing. When I looked it up on Snopes, they also said, yeah, it wasn't really a prediction, but it still makes you wonder, like, of all the things they could have predicted as a pandemic. Now, I suppose because of SARS and MERS and swine flu and bird flu, that all of those are considered in the coronavirus family. I suppose they were just generically saying coronavirus. But it is interesting, they mentioned from bats to pigs to humans, and then humans to hospitals, and hospitals and affected patients then getting on planes and going around the world and impacting other countries. That is kind of what's happened. Now, it didn't happen in Brazil, it happened in China, but the details were off, but the transmission is pretty close to what actually happened. So, wow, like this is crazy. Like 3 months before the COVID-19 hit, Bill Gates and Johns Hopkins University hold a simulation about a global pandemic with a coronavirus. Does that not seem like too on the nose? There's so many things kind of behind the scenes of this that are going on that when you find out about them, now again, conspiracy theories, they're going to run amok. I'm not interested in all of that. I'm not interested in a whole lot of conjecture, but this one's pretty explicit. Like, this one is out there for all the world to see. And again, if you're just joining us late, look up, Google Event 201. It happened in October of 2019, hosted by Bill Gates and Johns Hopkins University. And it was a simulation of a worldwide pandemic with a coronavirus. And when I read this and I saw like the scenario, I'm thinking, wow, they could not have been more spot on. All right. So, again, a lot of websites are out there. Snopes is dismissing this as it didn't predict it. As part of this event, by the way, they gave out little plush animals, a small stuffed toy that was a mock-up of a coronavirus. They gave it to all the attendees. That was kind of weird. And so they got to take those home with them. Of course, some people are kind of saying that that it was like a commemoration of the event, but some people are saying that it's like, hey, we're about to see this come to action, so you'll have this little plush thing. Like I said, the whole conspiracy part of this, I'm not really buying into. I know people like those kinds of things. I don't. But I do look at facts, and it is just so interesting to me. So I think what could be helpful is looking at what they discovered in their kind of simulation, because it's kind of interesting. You do this simulation about a pandemic, and of course I talked about the 65 million people dying worldwide. What else did they find? So they're saying that the economic effect on the GDP, again in the simulation, was 0.7% of the global GDP, or $570 billion, is what it would cost to deal with this. I think it's probably going to exceed more than that. Companies operating globally can take action to mitigate the threat, so they talk about some of those actions that companies can take. There was a list of kind of like things that they had of conclusions, how they get out of there. Okay, let me see if I can find that one. They're saying that we have a preparedness gap, that we're not ready for these kinds of things, and obviously with the way that things are being handled right now, we're not. Where did it go? I know I printed out. Oh, here it is. Public-private cooperation for pandemic preparedness and response. So this is from the Center for Health Security. Go to centerforhealthsecurity.org/event 201. You can see all the details about this. But they said the next severe pandemic will not only cause great illness and loss of life, but could also trigger major cascading economic and societal consequences that could contribute greatly to global impact and suffering. Efforts to prevent such consequences or respond to them as they unfold will require unprecedented levels of collaboration between governments, international organizations, and the private sector. There have been important efforts to engage the private sector in epidemic and outbreak preparedness at the national or regional level. However, there are major unmet global vulnerabilities, which we're all seeing right now, and international system challenges posed by pandemics that will require new, robust forms of public-private cooperation to address. So, Event 201 was a pandemic exercise. Again, if you joined us late, this happened October 18th, 2019, and it demonstrated a number of the important gaps in pandemic preparedness. So, they have, I believe it was 7 total conclusions that they're making about this that I thought would be interesting to share with you guys here today. The first one is governments, international organizations, and businesses should plan now for how essential corporate capabilities will be utilized during a pandemic. During this severe pandemic, public sector efforts to control the outbreak are likely to become overwhelmed. So we're talking about like hospitals being able to handle the patients. We're talking about infrastructures for making sure people still get access to food and other essentials. All of that has to come together. And they're right. We're seeing how the supply chain of things has had to scramble. So that was interesting that they pointed out that we would be vulnerable in that way. But industry assets, if swiftly and appropriately deployed, could help save lives and reduce economic losses. Companies with operations focused on logistics, social media, and distribution systems will be needed to enable government emergency response, risk communication, and medical countermeasures during a pandemic. This includes working together to ensure strategic commodities are available. And we're not talking about toilet paper. That's not a strategic commodity. But food obviously is one of those. And accessible for public health response. We're also talking about medications. Like right now, we're talking about the hydrochloroquine being available for people, since we're seeing efficacy in that, having higher doses of vitamin C, for example, as ways to be able to handle this. So lots of kind of supply chain efforts. Contingency planning for potential operational partnership between government and business will be complex. There will be legal and organizational details to be addressed. We are seeing that right now, that there's kind of legal loopholes that need to be closed up so that private sector and government can work together to deal with this. Government should work to identify the most critical areas of need and reach out to industry players with the goal of finalizing agreements before the next large pandemic. Well, obviously that didn't happen. And plus, how do you know all of the factors in a pandemic before the pandemic happens? Like, what do you think about when it comes to all these things? Like, how do you know how to adequately prepare? It's an interesting question when you're not in a pandemic mode. The Global Preparedness Monitoring Board would be well positioned to help monitor and contribute to efforts that governments, international organizations, and businesses should take for pandemic preparedness and response. So apparently there's this group, Global Preparedness Monitoring Board, that should be the one kind of coordinating between all the countries. Here's how we address this. Well, the problem is they did this simulation in October, late October, and then what broke loose in late December. Was that enough time to get things in place and to strategize? I suppose it's going to prepare us for the next time something like this happens, but this is something like we've never seen before, right? Number 2, industry, national governments, and international organizations should work together to enhance internationally held stockpiles of medical countermeasures to enable rapid and equitable distribution during a severe pandemic. So the World Health Organization currently has a vaccine for influenza stockpiled, with contracts in place with pharmaceutical companies that have agreed to supply vaccines should who request them as one possible approach. This stockpile could be expanded to augment their ability to distribute vaccines and therapeutics to countries in the greatest need during a severe pandemic. Do we want the World Health Organization determining who gets the vaccine and who doesn't? Like, I get it, if you stockpile enough, maybe, but do you really have enough for everybody? It's kind of an interesting thing. This should also include any available experimental vaccine stockpiles for them to blueprint and research and develop blueprint pathogens to deploy in a clinical trial during outbreaks in collaboration with various organizations. So We're looking at like hydrochloroquine right now that is being used and helping patients get off the ventilator pretty quick. Do we want WHO to be the one that determines who gets the hydrochloroquine and the autonomy of our rights and freedoms and ability to have what we need and want? Does America want to give that up? Does China want to give that up? It's very interesting here, where they're trying to centralize who controls kind of the medical treatment in the midst of a pandemic. See where I'm going here? Other approaches could involve regional stockpiles or multinational agreements during a catastrophic outbreak. Countries may be reluctant to part with scarce medical resources. Yeah. Like, can you imagine? Like, okay, all of your hydrochloroquine you've got to send to the World Health Organization, and there's none available in the United States unless we give it back to you at the World Health Organization. Who does not have your best interests in mind? And what would stop them from saying, okay, we don't really like the United States, so how about we not give you any? And then people die. It's something to think about. A robust international stockpile could therefore help to ensure that low and middle resource settings receive needed supplies, regardless of whether they produce such supplies domestically. Countries with national supplies or domestic manufacturing capabilities should commit to donating their product to this virtual stockpile. Countries should support this effort through the provision of additional funding. I don't really like that one. I think that one is just ripe for corruption. And it's like, who determines who gets the medication, who doesn't, who determines distribution, who determines anything about it? That's a disturbing one. Number 3, countries, international organizations, and global transportation companies should work together to maintain travel and trade during these pandemics. Travel and trade are essential to the economy around the world, as well as to national and even local economies. They should be maintained even in the face of a pandemic. Well, we're seeing that. The mail still runs every day. I see the UPS and FedEx trucks out there every single day. We see truck drivers delivering products to stores. So that is still happening. Improved decision making, coordination, and communications between the public and private sectors relating to risk, travel advisories, import-export restrictions, and border measures will be needed. The fear and uncertainty experienced during past outbreaks, even those limited to a national or regional level, have sometimes led to unjustified border measures, the closure of customer-facing businesses, import bans, and the cancellation of airline flights and international shipping. So, from a consumer standpoint, you can't fly. I mean, you can fly, but not recommended you fly anywhere. And there's a lot of countries you can't fly into now because you arrive, they won't let you come in. So there are pretty big restrictions already to individual consumers. But if you're a part of the supply chain to keep the economy going, they're trying to kind of create measures to make sure that that can still happen. A particularly fast-moving and lethal pandemic, like COVID-19, could therefore result in political decisions to slow or stop the movement of people and goods, like social distancing, staying home, potentially harming economies already vulnerable in the face of an outbreak. Now, the United States is one of the more richer countries in the world. I worry about some of these world countries, other countries around the world that aren't as rich, and this is devastating to them right now. As inconvenient as it is for us Americans, I think about those third world countries that they were already having trouble as it is, and this is just adding to it. Ministries of health and other government agencies should work together now with international airlines and global shipping companies to develop realistic response scenarios and start a contingency planning process with the goal of mitigating economic damage by maintaining key travel and trade routes during a large-scale pandemic. In other words, even as this thing ravages and there's all these kind of people having to socially distance themselves and we all kind of change the way we're doing things like we're doing right now, they want everything about the supply chain in the economy to continue on. Now, the problem is all those poor people that have to drive those vehicles and have to deliver those goods, they have to interact with other people. They are at a higher risk, just like our medical frontline people, at a higher risk of getting COVID-19. and possibly having consequences from that. Supporting continued trade and travel in such an extreme circumstance may require the provision of enhanced disease control measures. So the people like this would have to like wear masks and get, clean their hands often and all those things. And personal protective equipment for transportation workers, government subsidies to support critical trade routes, and then potential liability protection in certain cases. In other words, if one of these people that's a part of the supply chain gets sick, it should probably be a workman's comp claim that is paid for by the company, so they have those kind of parameters in place. Again, this is the recommendation, the 7 recommendations out of this simulation that happened in October 2019. International organizations including WHO, the International Air Transport Association, and the International Civil Aviation Organization should be partners in all these preparedness and response efforts. Number 4, governments should provide more resources and support for the development and surge manufacturing of vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics that will be needed during this severe pandemic. In the event of this happening, countries may need population-level supplies of safe and effective medical countermeasures, including vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics. We're seeing that right now, you guys, with the hydrochloroquine. People are worried. I had somebody on Instagram earlier DM me. She has lupus. She takes hydrochloroquine for lupus, and she has a 30-day supply, and she's already been told, supplies are low on this right now, and so she's worried she won't have the medication. Well, there are pharmaceutical companies that are ramping up production of that, knowing that it's being used for this purpose to help patients with COVID-19 and to make sure the patients that have been using it for its stated purpose, lupus and anti-malarial type of things, it's still going to be available. And so they're recommending that we have this surge happen. But I mean, pharmaceutical companies have the capability of scaling. And I would assume they are, and they're getting a lot of pressure to scale. The ability to rapidly develop, manufacture, distribute, and dispense large quantities of these medications will be needed to contain and control the global outbreak. Countries with enough resources should greatly increase their capability. So in other words, if we have the ability to be making, for example, hydrochloroquine a whole lot more than we have been, it's probably already happening now. Definitely in America, definitely in China, definitely in the westernized culture. And hopefully there's enough for all the people that would be dealing with this right now, and enough to be able to maybe export to those countries where they don't have that capability to manufacture. In coordination with WHO and other relevant multilateral and domestic mechanisms, investment should be made in new technology and industrial approaches that will allow this distribution to take place. This will require addressing legal and regulatory barriers, among other issues. So you can see where they were thinking in the midst of this pandemic exercise in October 2019. They were already predicting some of the challenges that would be arising out of a pandemic. And now that we're in the midst of it, you're kind of seeing, okay, are we doing some of these things that they came up with? Number 5, global business should recognize the economic burden of pandemics and fight for a stronger preparedness. So a lot of businesses are suffering right now, especially small businesses. Like my heart is for the small business owner who already kind of struggles to keep the lights on. Those people are hurting bad right now. Now, depending on the what their business is, a lot of non-essential businesses are shut down right now. So like jewelry stores and other kind of, you're not, pawn shop, you're not kind of doing all those things right now. So the food manufacturers are still open, but they're on a limited basis here in America, for example, where they can only do takeout or delivery. Businesses are hurting. And so they're saying that they should be the ones to fight for a stronger preparedness. In addition to investing more in preparing their own company and industry, business leaders and their shareholders should actively engage with governments, advocate for increased resources for pandemic preparedness. Globally, there's been a lack of attention and investment in high-impact pandemics, which we are in one now, and business is largely not involved in existing efforts. So if governments are going to allocate resources that would help in the preparedness, then business should have a voice in that. And I guarantee you, after this is all over with COVID-19, these are the kind of efforts that the companies that are still surviving are going to call for and wait a minute. If this happens again, we could be devastated. And so they got to work closely with those government agencies. To a significant extent, this is due to a lack of awareness of the business risks posed by a pandemic. We're seeing now those business risks are being exposed. There's a lot of companies, when all this is over, you guys, that are going to have to shut their doors for good because they were already teetering. And I know of at least 3 businesses that had planned on opening and thriving in the month of March, that they literally opened their doors and then suddenly were told, oh, sorry, you can't open your doors. So think about like all the money it took for them to kind of get to that point of opening their doors, all the financial risk if they have things that won't last on the shelf, all that loss of product. This is hitting people harder than we realize, and these are the kind of things that they were trying to, in this simulation in October, they were trying to predict. We've got to be better prepared for. Tools should be built to help large private sector companies visualize the risks posed by infectious disease and pathways to mitigate the risk through a public-private cooperation to strengthen preparedness. A severe pandemic would greatly interfere with workforce health, business operations, and the movement of goods and services. Yeah, everybody's working from home now. And those people that are out there in stores and grocery stores and big box stores, those people that are still working out there, they're putting themselves at risk. Now, I'm noticing when I have been to Sam's Club, for example, all the employees are wearing masks now. All of them are wearing gloves, and they're doing their best to kind of protect themselves, but they are at risk right now. A catastrophic level outbreak can also have profound and long-lasting effects on entire industries, the economy, and societies in which business operates. I'm trying to think of the industries that could just totally be devastated. I mean, it's a lot of them. The other day I did a Jimmy Rants about how farmers are having to pour out tens of thousands of gallons of milk because they just got nowhere to send it to. And the dairy industry, you guys, is one of those industries that's already been teetering on not being profitable. And now they're having to dump out perfectly good, real whole food. I think they're going to be one of the ones that will be impacted a lot. The dairy industry is going to flail at the end of this. And there's probably lots of other ones just like them. While governments and public health authorities serve as the first line of defense against fast-moving outbreaks, their efforts are chronologically underfunded and lack sustained support. Global business leaders should play a far more dynamic role as advocates with a stake in a stronger pandemic preparedness. The economic effects of this, you guys, are going to last for years to come. And this foundation that was doing this simulation, Event 201 in October of 2019, they saw all this coming. And if we don't kind of heed the lessons of the real world example of what's happening with COVID-19, when the next one hits, it could just totally devastate. I'm not saying this to scare you. I'm saying it that we need to be better prepared. Number 6, international organizations should prioritize reducing economic impacts of epidemics and pandemics. Much of the economic harm resulting from a pandemic is likely due to counterproductive behavior of individuals, companies, and countries. like people going out and acting like this isn't a big deal on spring break. Could that be the irresponsibility, counterproductive behavior of individuals? For example, actions that lead to a disruption of travel and trade or change consumer behavior can greatly damage economies. In addition to other response activities, an increase in reassessment of pandemic financial support will certainly be needed in a severe pandemic, as many sectors of society may need financial support during or after a severe pandemic, including healthcare, essential businesses, and national governments. I think about like the stimulus package that was passed, that everybody that earns a certain amount of income or less is going to get a check now. And you wonder how much that's going to help and all those kinds of things. And I know a lot of people are thinking about that. Furthermore, the ways in which these existing funds can now be used are limited. The international health regulations prioritize both minimizing public health risk and avoiding unnecessary interference with international traffic and trade, but there will also be a need to identify those critical nodes of the banking system and the global and national economies that are too essential to fail. There are some that are likely to need emergency international financial support. The problem is, where does that money come from? Like, money just doesn't grow on trees. And I'm concerned, you guys, at the end of all this, the economic effects will continue because they've got to make up, how do they pay for all of these things? Where does that money come from? It's going to be interesting to watch it unfold. The World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, regional development banks, national governments, foundations, and others should explore ways to increase the amount and availability of funds during a pandemic and ensure that they can be flexibly used where needed. All right, one more. Number 7. Governments and the private sector should assign a greater priority to developing methods to combat mis- and disinformation prior to the pandemic response. Governments will need to partner with traditional and social media companies to research and develop nimble approaches to keep misinformation from happening. Well, the problem is Pandora's box is open for anybody and everybody to say whatever they want in the midst of a pandemic. And right now, again, I'm not one of those people that buys into conspiracy theories, but I know there are people who are, and they love to take them to the nth degree. And when you do that, you get wackadoodle kind of things put out there. And so they're saying one of the things is we have to try to find ways to combat that. Now, I think there is a fine line between combating disinformation, misinformation, and silencing people that have information, like the hydrochloroquine, for example. A lot of those kinds of people that were saying things about that being helpful for COVID-19 were being shut out and silenced early on about this because they were worried, oh my gosh, you're going to give people false hope. But now we know the efficacy of it. Now it's starting to gain a little more traction. But not everybody expressing opinions is a conspiracy theorist and has ill will in mind. A lot of them are trying to actually help in the midst of this. I know Peter Attia here on Instagram. He's got a whole team that is working on. If you're not watching Peter Attia on Instagram, he's got some incredible Instagram IGTV videos where he's talking about how we're supposed to handle this and kind of thinking outside the box. Is what he does considered disinformation, misinformation? I mean, watch it for yourself and see. I think he's doing a great job of staying level-headed and saying this is kind of a reasonable response to things based on the data we're looking at. And so go check him out if you haven't seen that on Instagram. Public health authorities should work with private employers and trusted community leaders such as faith leaders to promulgate factual information to employees and citizens. Trusted, influential private sector employees should create... My cat is meowing really loud again. And now she shuts up. Trusted, influential private sector employers should create the capacity to readily and reliably augment public messaging, manage the rumors and misinformation, and amplify credible information to support emergency public communications. National public health agencies should work in close collaboration with the World Health Organization to create the capacity to rapidly develop and release consistent health messages. And for their part, media should commit to ensuring that authoritative messages are prioritized and that false messages are suppressed through the use of technology. Well, the media is not interested in that. The media is interested in keeping you anxious so that you keep going back to the well of watching them, because if you're anxious, you're going to keep engaging. The more you engage, you've got eyeballs, and I talked about this the other day. They want you to stay glued to the TV set. They want you to stay engaged in their content because they work you up into a frenzy. You don't want to stop looking at it. So I don't think the media is interested in this at all. If we had an objective media that stayed non-biased, then perhaps, but there are so many entities right now that are in this not for the interest of public health, but the interests of their own personal gain here. They want to make money in the midst of this. And to me, that's disgusting. That's kind of the thing that I'm watching right now going, really? Like in the midst of this, of all things, I think we can put aside trying to make money right now and just try to get people through it. All right, so the conclusion, if we accomplish the above goals, it's going to require collaboration among governments, international organizations, and global business. If these recommendations are robustly pursued, major progress can be made to diminish the potential impact and consequences of pandemics. We call on all leaders in global business, international organizations, and national governments to launch an ambitious effort to work together to build a world better prepared for a severe pandemic. Well, the problem is, when they came out with all those conclusions in November of 2019, this hit about a month and a half later. There was not enough time to kind of implement a lot of these things. I wonder how many of those things can now be applied posthumously to the COVID-19 pandemic to prepare us for the next one. Like, we will have another one. Now, will it be to this severity? I don't know. SARS and MERS were not this bad in terms of having to socially isolate and all the things we're doing now. COVID-19 is kind of unique in that aspect. So how do we take the lessons we learned from COVID-19 and apply this Event 201 simulation that happened in October of 2019? How do we make this so that we're better prepared the next time? That's kind of the goal here. But I thought you'd find it interesting. There was a global pandemic simulation in October of 2019 hosted by Bill Gates and Johns Hopkins University that looked at and simulated what a coronavirus outbreak around the world that led to a pandemic would look like. All right, let's see what you guys have to say. Welcome in, welcome in. We're going to go to Instagram Live first, and if we have time, we'll come over here over on Facebook Live. All right, JimmyRants.com is the website if you are interested in checking out the past episodes. Healing Scenery says, it gives me chills. I believe he planned it. Too many coincidences. I don't know if he planned it, but it is interesting. And I read some other places that there was a huge stock sell-off around that same time. And then what happened in March? Major losses in the stock market. So it does seem to be coincidental. Too odd not to be deliberate, says Healing Scenery as well. I'm going to leave that to people with conspiratorial mindsets to think that through. I'm just not so sure, to be honest. Ashley says, I'm glad you are sifting through this info on your platform. Gate stuff gets pretty fishy. Yeah, I mean, again, I'm trying hard to remain objective about this and to not buy into the conspiracy theory part of it, but it does make you kind of stop and back up and go, whoa. Anita says, World Health Organization is about to have a world government, is about having a world government. We need to bring drug manufacturing back to America. Yeah, they also are the ones pushing for a vegan agenda too. And I know Bill Gates is a vegan, and he's been funding a lot of the vegan efforts. So I'm wondering, again, trying not to be conspiracy theorist about this, but I'm wondering what connection that has to this as well. There are so many outlandish theories out there. Some just blow my mind and you can't help but laugh. Yeah, like I said, I'm not buying into all the theories that are out there because it's just, there's people that like it. I remember after 9/11, there were so many stupid theories about 9/11 and really crazy ones that I was just like, no. So I'm trying to avoid kind of falling into that. I know people like that kind of thing, but I am not one of those people. All right, thank you, Instagram. We're going to go over here to Facebook Live. Hello, guys. Thanks for being here. Amanda says controversial. Yes, it is quite controversial. That's why we're talking about it here today on Jimmy Rants. Jeannie says Bill Gates did a TED Talk about global pandemic in 2015. He did because he was concerned after SARS that we didn't have the preparedness to deal with that adequately. And so, yeah, he did do a TED Talk in 2015. And I can appreciate that there are people out there wanting us to be better prepared for these kinds of things that we're dealing with right now. So I don't think in and of itself it's a bad thing that we talk about being better prepared for a worldwide global pandemic. Nobody could have predicted we would be dealing with this in 2020. Like a year ago, did any of us think, even 6 months ago? And let's face it, those of us in America, 2 months ago, did we know our lives were about to shift radically? Because if we knew, I think we would have started making some changes. Maybe the stockpiling of food and TP and all that would have happened a whole lot sooner. When this became really real is when all the panic set in. But Bill Gates was doing a simulation in October of 2019. So did he know? I don't know. Jody says this game is being played out on a global chessboard. Yeah. And it's real now. There's no simulation about this. This is very real. Amanda says, I'm not taking a vaccine, only extra vitamin C. Yeah, I mean, in general, I think we're all of us that are generally healthy are doing those things. So you're right. Bill Gates wants to depopulate the world. Well, I don't know about that, Amanda, but thank you for sharing your opinion. I know he wants the world to be vegan. He has made that very clear many times. Vicky said, all this is very sad. It is sad. And hopefully people are heeding what's going on. Eyes wide open, guys. Not buying into everything you read, but realizing that there's other things happening while all this is going on. So don't think things are always as they seem. Nancy says, hello from Canada. I appreciate your comments and perspective on the issues. Hey, that's what I'm trying to do. And again, I'm trying to be a calming sense in the midst of chaos, because I think we've got enough people trying to rile you up and make you anxious. That is not my goal at all. I don't want to make anybody anxious. I want us to be chill, but I also want you to be informed. And sometimes in the midst of being informed, you're going to hear things that might make you a little anxious. So I do apologize if you're anxious about anything, but my goal is to inform you so that you make better choices for how you handle things. All right, guys, so that's what I wanted to share with you today. If you did not already know about the Event 201 simulation that took place October 18, 2019, go Google that, Event 201. Again, there's lots of videos on YouTube. If you want to go watch them, if you're watching the replay on YouTube, go look it up, Event 201. Lots of snippets from it, and you can see how the simulation took place and how they were able to respond, and watching how things unfolded around the world. It was really, it's really fascinating. So, and again, all this happened just literally weeks away from COVID-19 becoming a reality, and months away from COVID-19 becoming that very pandemic that they were talking about we need to be better prepared for. That's it for this episode of Jimmy Rants. JimmyRants.com is the website. As always, we are over on Instagram. You got to go follow me there at Livin' Low Carb Man, LivinLowCarbMan. Once you're there, you can engage live in the content. We go live at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, 2 p.m. Eastern Time on Saturday and Sunday. And sometimes we do a 5 p.m. one Eastern Time. That's what we got here for you today. So thank you for joining us here today on Jimmy Rants. JimmyRants.com is the website to see all the past episodes. We also throw them up on YouTube. Type in a keyword, Jimmy Rants. You will find the show. So guys, we'll be back again real soon with another episode. So until next time, we'll see you then. That's a wrap.